I still remember the cold wind that crawled through the alleys of Ellenford that morning. It was the kind of wind that smelled of smoke and forgotten promises, the kind that made even beggars look up and wonder if the heavens had finally given up on them. I was one of those beggars now, or at least I looked like one. I had traded my robes of gold and my boots of lion leather for the dirt-stained rags of a stable boy. My hair was tangled, my beard overgrown, and I carried only a wooden staff I didn't need to walk. No guards followed me. No trumpet marked my passage. That was the point. No one was supposed to recognize the king of Armathia, walking alone through the market square. My name is Aldrich Thorn. King Aldrich Thorn, if titles still matter. But I had left my name behind with a crown I didn't wear anymore. Not after what happened in the castle. Not after they betrayed me. I had ruled for 10 years with iron in one hand and mercy in the other. At least that's what I told myself. The truth is, I ruled too far from the ground. From the people. I surrounded myself with men who spoke pretty lies and women who smiled with daggers behind their teeth. And in the middle of it all, my brother, Selim. I had trusted him more than anyone. The betrayal didn't come with poison or blade. It came with silence. With papers I never saw, meetings I was never told about, decrees passed in my name without my seal. I was still king in the songs, but not in the throne room. By the time I realized, it was too late. My own counsel whispered of my incompetence. My own knights answered to him. So I left. Not in shame. In fury. I wanted to see the kingdom he claimed to love. The kingdom he said I had forgotten. I wanted to walk the alleys, smell the gutters, feel the hunger. And I did. 4 weeks. That's how I found her. It was in a tavern on the east end of Kellenstone, a forgotten village barely marked on maps. A place where miners drank away their lungs and women worked for silver they'd never keep. I had come in limping, coughing like the other beggars. No one noticed me, except her. She stood behind a counter, sleeves rolled up, hair tied with a piece of torn linen, eyes darker than dusk over the ocean. She wasn't beautiful in the way queens are beautiful. She was beautiful like fire, something wild, necessary, dangerous if ignored. Her name was Lisa. And the first thing she ever said to me was, "That seat is for paying customers." I didn't move. She narrowed her eyes. "If you're waiting for free bread, you'll wait forever." I smiled. "Then I'll wait for eternity." She frowned, unimpressed. And poetic beggars starve just like the rest. But even then, there was something in her voice. Sharp, yes, but not cruel. She could have thrown me out. She could have ignored me. But instead, she brought me a bowl of barley stew and placed it on the table with a sigh. "Eat fast," she muttered. "Before my father sees." I would later learn her father was the owner of the tavern, and a man who hated beggars almost as much as he hated himself. But that day, he was nowhere to be seen. "You shouldn't give away food," I said. She rolled her eyes. "You shouldn't be quoting philosophers in a place like this." I studied her, then the room. Faded curtains, cracked stone. They're heavy with smoke and arguments. "This place deserves philosophers," I said. She snorted. "It barely deserves furniture." I ate. And she watched me like she didn't trust me not to steal the spoon. But when I was done, she refilled the bowl without a word. I came back the next day. And the next. Always dressed as a beggar. Always treated like one. And every day, she gave me something. A piece of bread. A quiet question. A challenge to some idea I offered. She was clever, sharper than any courtier I'd ever met. When she spoke, it was with certainty. When she listened, it was like she was searching for lies. She would have made a fine queen, I thought. But I didn't dare say that. Not when I was pretending to be a man with no name. One evening, she asked me why I never told her where I was from. "Because I'm running from it," I said. "Running from where?" "The palace," I whispered, smirking. She laughed, thinking it a joke. "Right? And I'm the lost daughter of a duchess." "Maybe you are," I said. That night, I slept outside the tavern door, just to be close to her voice the next morning. That was the moment I knew I was in love. And she had no idea the man sleeping on straw beside her door was still, by law and blood, the rightful king of Armathia. It had been 12 days since I first stepped into Lisa's tavern as a beggar. 12 mornings of stale bread and bitter coffee. 12 nights of sleeping near the fire pit, pretending I didn't hear her arguing with her father behind a kitchen wall. The man was cruel in the way all men become cruel when they've been broken too many times. He drank more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was usually to insult. Lisa bore the brunt of it like stone bears the wind, silent, unmoved, slowly weathered. I hated him, and I hated myself for needing his roof. But I stayed. Because of her. There were moments, small, almost invisible, when I saw something in Lisa that I hadn't seen in any of the highborn ladies back in Armathia. A spine unshaken by violence. A mind untouched by flattery. She was everything a queen should be, if queens were chosen by merit and not blood. One evening, while scrubbing floors beside her, I asked the question I'd been biting back for days. Why do you stay here? She didn't answer at first. Just kept scrubbing, jaw tight. Then she spoke with that quiet rage I'd come to recognize. Because someone has to protect this place. From what? From men who think they own everything they touch. I looked at her father through the open doorway. He was passed out again, bottle in hand. And if you could leave? She met my gaze, and her eyes didn't blink. I would burn this place down before I let another man like him run it. I believed her. That night, I told her my name. Not Aldrich Thorne, the king, but the name my mother used when no one was listening, Aller. It wasn't a lie. It was the last piece of truth I had before the crown swallowed me. Aller, she repeated. Strange name for a beggar. Maybe I was never meant to be just a beggar. She studied me for a moment too long. You walk like a soldier. I laughed. You've been watching me walk? I watch everyone who walks too proud with empty pockets. I smiled. She didn't. You're hiding something, she added. And you're not. That shut her up. We worked in silence after that, but the air between us had shifted. A line had been crossed. She knew I wasn't what I seemed. And for the first time, I feared what would happen if she found out the rest. Not because she would hate me, but because she might stop treating me like a man and start treating me like a king. The next day, I left the tavern at dawn and walked through the lower town. I needed to see what Selim had done to my kingdom, what he claimed I had forgotten. I saw beggars with blood on their sleeves, children with coin-shaped bruises under their eyes. Taxes had risen. Guards were crueler. Bread cost twice what it used to. And justice had become something only the rich could afford. Selim had turned my throne into a cage. He told the people it was for their safety, for the kingdom's growth. But the truth was in the mud under their nails. They weren't growing. They were drowning. I returned to the tavern with mud on my boots and fire in my lungs. Lisa saw it before I spoke. What happened? Your king is a coward, I spat. She blinked. You know him too well. She crossed her arms. And what would you do if you were king? I'd burn down the council chamber. I'd drag every noble into the mud and make them earn their coin. I stopped. She was staring at me the way one might stare at a storm forming in the distance. You talk like a man who's seen the inside of a palace. Maybe I have. Or maybe, she stepped closer, voice low. You are who you say you are not. The silence between us crackled. I didn't deny it. Not fully. She leaned in. Tell me the truth. I looked around. No one else was in the tavern. Just the dying fire and the echo of my own heartbeat. I was born in the palace, I said, raised by wolves in silk. That's not an answer. I left because the crown became a noose, because power surrounded me, and I became blind. She didn't flinch. So now what? You think sleeping on straw makes you righteous? I laughed bitterly. No. But at least I can breathe again. She sat down across from me. The fire lit her face in amber shadows. You're the king, aren't you? I nodded. She exhaled. Then, without bowing, without gasping, without any of the stupid reverence that others gave me, she said something I'll never forget. Then you're the only man who can burn this kingdom down and build it right. That night, I didn't sleep. Her words echoed in my head like drums from a forgotten war. You're the only man who can burn this kingdom down and build it right. No one had ever spoken to me that way. Not my generals, not my scribes, not even my mother before she died. They all whispered dreams of preservation, legacy, loyalty. But not her. Lisa didn't want the kingdom repaired. She wanted it reborn, and she was willing to see it shattered to get there. And God's help me, so was I. At sunrise, I stood behind a tavern, watching the first wagon pass. A farmer and his daughter. The man wore rags patched 20 times over. The girl stared at me like she'd never seen a man with boots before. The farmer noticed and tugged her hand. They hurried off. I wasn't sure what they saw in me. A beggar. A madman. Maybe both. But Lisa had seen the king. She didn't ask questions that morning. Just handed me a cup of broth and walked away like nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and we both knew it. Her father, however, remained oblivious, until the day he caught me touching his daughter's hand near the fire. He flew into a rage. You think you can sit here, eat our food, and then put your filthy hands on my girl, he roared. She's not yours to own, I said. He raised a hand to strike me. He never got the chance. Lisa stepped between us, her voice low, deadly. If you touch him, I'll throw you into the pig pen where you belong. Her father stared at her like she'd turned into a monster. You've lost your mind. No, she said. I've just found my spine. He didn't hit her. He didn't say another word. Just stumbled back into the house and slammed the door. I looked at her stunned. You didn't have to. She cut me off. Yes, I did. From that moment on, we belonged to each other. Not with kisses or vows, but with something far more dangerous, loyalty. The next week, I told her everything. About Selim. About the council. About how I'd fled the castle in secret when I realized they were preparing to have me declared unfit to rule. Unfit, she asked. They say I lost the fire. That I've gone soft. She gave me a crooked smile. They're wrong. You haven't gone soft. You've just started listening. I was still king, but without a throne, without an army, without anything but the clothes on my back. I was powerless. Until Lisa changed that. She began introducing me to people. Not nobles, not knights, but the people who kept the kingdom alive, the blacksmith with a son conscripted for unpaid taxes, the herbalist whose land had been seized to build a road no one used, the widow who baked bread for soldiers and never got paid. They didn't know who I was. Not at first. They just knew I listened. Then listening became power. Rumors began to spread of a man wandering the roads, helping farmers file fake names to avoid conscription, of a vagabond who spoke like a prince and taught peasants how to write legal letters that confused the court scribes, of a stranger who refused coin but asked questions no beggar should ask. And then one day I went too far. A nobleman's carriage had trampled a merchant boy in the lower district. The man didn't stop, didn't even look back. I found the boy's mother sobbing in the street. I held her while she screamed, then stood in front of the palace gate and shouted the nobleman's name until the guards came. They beat me. 5 of them. Clubs, boots, fists. I didn't fight back. Not because I couldn't, but because I wanted to bleed in public. Lisa found me that night on the edge of the river, broken ribs and all. She didn't cry. She just cleaned my wounds and whispered, "Now they'll know who you are." And they did. The next morning, someone left bread at the tavern door. Then firewood. Then medicine. The people were waking. And my brother Selim, he was watching. Because the day after the beating, I found a note under my door. A single line, written in ink as black as his heart. You should have stayed gone. I burned the letter. But I remembered the sin of it, like rot soaked in perfume. That night, Lisa said something that would change everything. You can't win this hiding behind stew pots and bandages. I'm not hiding, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Then take back what's yours. How? I'll show you. She had a plan. Of course she had a plan. Lisa always did. While I was trying to remember how to breathe through cracked ribs, she was 5 steps ahead, spinning threads of rebellion like a spider in the rafters. I know a man, she said that night as she stitched the last cut on my temple. Well, a boy, really. But he knows how to make words burn. A poet. A printer. That surprised me more than I cared to admit. We still have those. She smirked. Not the royal kind. The kind that works out of cellars and prints on stolen paper. The kind your brother would hang for sedition. And you trust him. I don't trust anyone, she said. But I know who hates the throne enough to help bring it down. His name was Eli. He couldn't have been more than 17. Skin like burnt parchment, eyes too old for his age. He lived behind a butcher shop and kept a press that rattled like bones under the floorboards. We met in the dark. He didn't bow, didn't ask who I was, just looked me up and down and said, "You're the one who got beat in the square?" "I am." "You bleed well," he said. "People remember that." I looked at Lisa and she nodded. So I told him what I wanted. "Print my words," I said. "Print them fast and loud. No names, no signature, just truth." "What kind of truth?" "The kind that makes kings sweat." He grinned. "That's the only kind worth printing." By sunrise, the first leaflets were already fluttering through the gutters of the capital. Handwritten speeches, poems that rhymed with fury, questions that couldn't be silenced. Who owns your bread? Where is your son? What has the council taken from you? By noon, Selim's guards were tearing them off the walls. By evening, they were back up again, twice as many. And somewhere, in a forgotten district of Ellenford, I stood in the shadows and watched a little girl read one aloud to her blind grandfather. She didn't know the words came from my hand. She didn't need to. They were hers now. The rebellion had begun, not with swords, but with ink. We operated in secret. Lisa's tavern became a hub for whispers and smuggled truths. Every night, someone new arrived with a story of land stolen, daughters sold into marriage, taxes raised so high men sold their teeth for bread. I listened to all of it. And for the first time since I left the palace, I felt like a king again. Not because I gave orders, but because they trusted me with their pain. Lisa, meanwhile, became something else entirely. She wasn't just the woman beside me anymore. She was the voice behind me, the fire beneath me, the sharp steel that cut through my doubt. Every time I wanted to run, she reminded me who I was. Every time I faltered, she dared me to keep going. "You were born in marble," she whispered one night, "but you belong in blood and earth. That's where real kings are made." I kissed her, and for a moment I forgot the crown, forgot the betrayal, forgot everything but the way her hands held my face like she already knew what it meant to lose me. I would have given up the throne for her, but she wouldn't let me. The crackdown came 3 days later. Guards raided the tavern just after dusk. Eli had been caught with a stack of unmarked papers and had screamed my name under a boot. Not my real name, just the one they called me in the streets now. The ghost of the crown. They didn't find me. Lisa had hidden me in a coal pit behind the stables, pressing a dirty rag to my mouth so I wouldn't scream when the soldiers smashed bottles and overturned tables inside. I could hear everything. Her father cursing, the guards threatening to burn the place down, someone being dragged out by the hair. When the silence finally returned and the smoke cleared, I crawled out coughing black soot and blood. She stood in the rubble, her arms crossed, her dress torn. "They didn't take you?" I asked. She shook her head. "They took Eli." I felt the air drain from my lungs. Where? The dungeons. Maybe worse. I wanted to run after him. She grabbed my shirt. "Don't. That's what they want. They'll expect you. He's just a boy. And you're a king who can't die yet," she said. The fire in her voice was stronger than mine. So I stayed. But that night, I swore that I would bring down everything Selim had built with lies. I would tear it brick by brick if that's what it took to free Eli, to restore justice, to give this kingdom a chance to breathe again. And I wouldn't do it alone. I'd do it with her. The next morning, the sky over Ellenford turned gray, heavy with rain it refused to let fall. I took it as a warning. The kind of stillness that comes before a kingdom changes hands or burns to the ground. Lisa didn't speak much. She wrapped her bruised hands in linen, fixed what she could in the wrecked tavern, and swept the ashes into a bucket like they hadn't been memories just the day before. I tried to help. She waved me away. "You're too royal to hold a broom now," she asked, voice flat. "I just don't want you to carry all of this alone." She looked at me, tired but still unbroken. Then stopped looking at me like I'm something you can't protect. "I'm trying to protect everything," I said. "You, Eli, the people, even the soul of this damned kingdom." She dropped the bucket. "Then fight for it." That was the last word she spoke to me that day. but her silence said everything I needed. We moved quickly. If Selim had taken Eli, it meant the council knew the rebellion had a voice. What they didn't know was that the voice belonged to their king. I needed to speak before they found out. So we printed one final message, a letter to the people, a confession. I wrote through the night, my hands shaking, every word soaked in memory and fury. I am the king you were promised, not the one you received. I wore a crown forged in ivory and deception, and I failed you. But now I walk among you, barefoot in your streets, broken by your burdens. And I swear, by the blood in my body and the fire in my soul, I will take back the throne, not for me, but for you. It was my first truth in years. Eli would have printed it with pride. Instead, it was Lisa who inked every copy. She did it in silence, jaw clenched, sleeves soaked in sweat. Her eyes never left the page. She didn't cry. She didn't blink. She just printed revolution with fingers blistered from the press. By dawn, the letter was everywhere. Slipped under doors, nailed to trees, tucked inside bread carts and fish baskets. By noon, it reached the palace. And by dusk, I was a hunted man. They came for me with fire. 5 riders in gold-trimmed cloaks, torches in hand, swords drawn. They didn't knock. They burned what was left of the tavern to the ground. We weren't there. Lisa had known they'd come. She always knew. We watched the fire from the cliff above the river, our backs against a boulder, our hearts between our teeth. They'll search every alley, I said. Then we give them something else to look at. She turned to me. Her hair was wild from the wind, her cheeks streaked with ash. But there was something in her that looked more royal than I had ever been. I need to get into the palace, I whispered. And do what? Remind them who I am. She stared at me for a long time, then nodded. We rode under moonlight, 2 borrowed horses from the tanner's boy. No saddles, no armor, just cloaks and silence. At the edge of the capital, we split. I would go alone. She would wait at the hollow tree near the garden wall, the one I used to sneak out of as a boy when I wanted to see how real people lived. It felt like lifetimes ago. Getting inside wasn't hard. I still remembered every brick of that place, every servant passage, every blind spot in the guard rotations. But walking those halls again, that was harder. They smelled the same, rose oil and firewood. But they felt haunted now. I moved like a ghost. My chambers were empty, my throne room darker than I remembered. My brother's chambers locked, but his council chamber was open, and they were all inside. They didn't see me at first. I watched from the shadows as Selim paced like a beast in a gilded cage. He calls himself the ghost of the crown, he muttered. As if anyone still cares. We should have killed him when we had the chance, hissed Lord Trevan, the same snake who once kissed my hand and spat behind my back. And make a martyr? Selim growled. No, he'll hang. In daylight. With every peasant watching, I stepped into the room. Then I suggest you start building a stage. 10 heads turned. 10 mouths dropped. Selim's face drained of color. You, he whispered. Me, I said. No sword. No crown. Just truth between my teeth. You've ruled long enough in shadow, I told them. Now stand in the light and face the man you tried to bury. The silence that followed my words felt heavier than any crown I'd ever worn. Selim's fingers twitched toward his belt, where a dagger glinted beneath his robe. But I wasn't afraid. Not because I had a weapon, because I didn't need one. You should have stayed dead, he said, stepping forward slowly, carefully. You don't belong here anymore. I smiled, blood rushing in my ears. I never stopped belonging. You just started pretending I didn't. He lunged, but I was faster, only with words. Try it, I said, voice loud enough to echo off the chamber walls. Try to kill me in front of your council. Show them who you really are. The room shifted. Eyes moved, hands lowered. Even Trevan took a half step back. Selim's dagger trembled, then disappeared into his cloak again. You think you can just walk back in here and reclaim the throne, he spat. No, I said. I think I can remind this kingdom who the throne was built for. And that's when the guards came. 6 of them, fully armed, all under Selim's command. He didn't need to order them. They knew. 2 grabbed my arms, twisting them behind my back. I didn't fight. Not because I couldn't, but because I wanted every pair of eyes in that room to see it happen. Chain him, Selim said. Let the people see their ghost bleed. They dragged me through the palace like a trophy. The servants gasped. Some turned their faces away. A few dropped to their knees. They recognized me. Even bloodied and bruised, even without my crown, I was still their king. And Selim knew it. He didn't speak as they chained me in the square. Didn't meet my eyes as they tightened the iron around my wrists and ankles. He stood on the balcony, high above, flanked by banners of gold and crimson, like a puppet made of silk. The crowd gathered fast. News travels differently when it's tied to fear. Lisa wasn't there. That terrified me more than the iron. Had she fled? Had they caught her too? Or worse, was she watching, somewhere in the mass of silent faces, unable to act? A herald stepped forward. The traitor known as the Ghost of the Crown is hereby sentenced to execution, he shouted. By order of King Selim, rightful ruler of Armathia. A murmur moved through the crowd like thunder through dry grass. Execution, someone hissed. Where's the trial? He's the real king. The guard stiffened. The murmurs grew. That's when Selim made his fatal mistake. He stepped forward and raised his voice. This man abandoned his kingdom. He turned his back on you. On all of us. He's not the king you remember. He is the reason you suffer. No, I rasped, lifting my chin despite the blood on my mouth. You are. The silence broke, and the voices rose. They didn't chant my name. They didn't riot. Not yet. But they turned. I saw it in their faces. Ripple of doubt, of memory, a seed. Night fell before they moved me to the dungeon. The guards walked slower now, uncertain. Some looked at me longer than they should have. One even loosened my chains just enough that my wrists didn't scream anymore. The torchlight flickered across the stone corridors as they locked me in a cell deep beneath the throne room, damp, cold, and empty, except for a rusted cup and a patch of straw in the corner. I sat in the dark and listened to the water drip from the ceiling. They had taken my name, my sword, my freedom, but not my fire. They could chain the king, but they couldn't chain the truth. And then I heard it. Soft footsteps, the scrape of metal against stone, a key in a lock. The door opened, and there she was, Lisa, hair tied back, dirt on her cheeks, eyes blazing. You came, I whispered. Of course I came. I wanted to throw myself at her, but the chains held fast. Are you mad? I asked. They'll kill you if they find you. She stepped inside. They'll kill all of us if you die. How did you get past the guards? I know a few back ways, she said, kneeling beside me. And some people still remember who you are. She held up a piece of iron. A key. You stole this. I borrowed it from someone who doesn't want to die loyal to a coward. The chains clicked open, one by one. I winced as the blood returned to my limbs. Eli's alive, she said. I looked up fast. What? He escaped. They tried to move him, but someone inside helped. He's hiding with the printers. I breathed for the first time in hours. We're not alone, Aldrich, she said. The people want you back, but they need to see it. With their own eyes. She held out her hand. Not like a servant helping her lord, but like a soldier helping her commander. We need to take back the palace, she said. Tonight, there was no time for hesitation. The palace guards changed shifts at midnight. Lisa knew that. She had memorized their patterns long before I ever returned. She had lived beneath their boots, scrubbed their hallways, learned every weakness they never bothered to hide. We can't just walk out, I whispered, massaging my wrists where the iron had left its bite. You're not going to walk, she said. You're going to disappear. She pulled from her satchel a guard's cloak, smudged with ash and blood, slightly too small for me, but enough to mask the truth. I bribed a sentry with his own conscience, she added. Told him you weren't the monster they painted you as. I smiled grimly. What did he say? He said he already knew. We moved fast through the underhalls, my heart pounding like it had when I was a boy sneaking wine from the cellar. Only this time, if I was caught, they'd cut off more than my allowance. Lisa led the way with the confidence of someone who'd survived every corridor. I followed her like I used to follow maps, desperate for direction, terrified of what I'd find at the end. We emerged behind the kitchens, where steam from boiling pots clouded the air, and no one looked twice at a man in a cloak. From there, we slipped into the servant quarters, then into the courtyard. I smelled the roses before I saw them. My mother's garden. She had planted them the year before she died. Yellow ones, her favorite. I hadn't walked past them in years. Lisa paused when she saw me looking. "Go," she said gently. "You have time." I didn't know why I did it. Maybe to remind myself that something good had once existed here. Maybe because I wanted to feel her presence again. My mother, Queen Elena, who had always told me, "A crown sits heaviest on a kind heart." I touched one bloom, then turned back to the fire waiting inside me. The throne room was empty. Of course it was. Selim didn't hold court at night, he drank. He hunted noble daughters and played king in private halls. But that night I needed no crowd, only a witness. Lisa closed the doors behind us. I stared at the throne. It hadn't changed. Not in 10 years. Same black stone. Same golden sigils. Same height that reminded everyone how far above them the king sat. I stepped forward. My feet didn't echo. I expected my heart to thunder, but instead it was quiet, eerily so, like the moment before a storm breaks the air in half. Then I heard the click of a blade. Selim's voice followed. "You really are a fool." He was standing in the upper gallery, alone, sword in hand. No guards, no council, just him and me. "You should have died in chains," he said. I turned slowly. "I should have never trusted you." He descended the steps, one by one. "You think the people want you. They want bread. They want peace. And I gave them both." "No," I said. "You gave them fear." He pointed the sword at me. "I gave them order. You gave them rebellion. I gave them truth. That's what you call running away?" "I didn't run," I said. "I watched. I listened. I bled with them. I became what you were too afraid to be. A beggar," he spat. "A king without servants. A ruler without walls. A man who doesn't need a throne to know who he is." He roared then, lunging forward. Steel sang. But I was ready. I caught his blade on a broken sconce from the wall. The metal sparked. He slashed again. I ducked. Grabbed his wrist. Twisted. The sword clattered to the floor. And then we were just two brothers. One wearing silk. One wearing ash. He swung his fist. It connected with my jaw. I staggered, blood in my mouth, but I didn't fall. "You were always weak," he hissed. "No," I said. "I was always merciful." And then I hit him back. Hard. He fell to his knees. His crown rolled from the folds of his robe. I didn't pick it up. Not yet. Lisa stepped forward, breathless, eyes wide. She had watched everything without a word. "Is it done?" she asked. "No," I said, looking at Selim, broken and furious at my feet. "It's just beginning. We didn't kill him. I made that choice. Not because I loved him, whatever bond we had long turned to ash, but because I wanted the people to see that justice could still exist." The next morning, I stood on a palace balcony, my hands clean, my voice steady. The crowd below was 10,000 strong. Their faces were worn, their eyes hungry for hope. Lisa stood beside me. Selim knelt in chains. "I have no speech," I told them. "No promises of gold. No songs of glory, only silence. And then, I am your king, not because of blood, not because of birth, but because I remember what it means to serve, to suffer, to rise." The people didn't cheer. They bowed, one by one. And as I stepped back from the railing, Lisa reached down and picked up the crown Selim had dropped. She didn't hand it to me. She placed it in my hands and said softly, "Now rule like the man you became, not the boy you were." I held the crown in my hands for a long time. It felt heavier than I remembered, not because it had changed, but because I had. A year ago, I would have lifted it to my head without question, taken my place with the arrogance I'd been raised to wear like a second skin. But now, as I stood with ash on my boots and Lisa at my side, I understood what it really meant to rule. Not to command. To carry. I turned to her. "To wear this," I said, "and not be swallowed by it." I need you." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes searched mine, not for weakness, but for certainty. And when she found it, she nodded. "Then let them see us rule together." The coronation was quiet. There were no parades, no gold-spun tapestries, no trumpets echoing through the capital. Only candles, people, silence, and the sky, finally raining after months of drought, washing the soot from the stones of Ellenford. I wore no armor. Lisa wore no jewels. She stood beside me not as a noble, not as a queen by blood, but as the woman who had rebuilt me from the bones of a crownless king. I looked at the faces in the crowd. Farmers, bakers, mothers, soldiers with scars, boys with ink-stained fingers, girls who had never believed power could look like this. I didn't kneel. They did. Not to a throne, to a promise. That day, I placed the crown on my own head. And when I turned to Lisa, I held out my hand, not to give her power, but to share it. She took it. And together, we walked into a rule unlike anything Armathia had ever known. The first decree we passed was to dissolve the council. Every man and woman who had held power by birthright alone was stripped of title and summoned to explain their worth. Some did. Many didn't. Selim was exiled, not to the borders, to the streets. He would live among the people he claimed to rule. No guards, no servants, no title, only his name. I left it to them to decide if he'd ever be forgiven. He would not be executed, not because he deserved mercy, but because the kingdom deserved better than blood for blood. Lisa supported the decision, but she didn't let me forget the cost. "We'll be hated for it," she said. "Good," I replied. "Let our enemies hate us for the right things." We rebuilt, but not with stone and coin, with listening. We walked the alleys every week, unannounced, with no procession. We sat with weavers, scribes, butchers. We asked them what they feared, what they hoped for, what we kept getting wrong. Some yelled at us. Some cried. One old woman threw bread at my chest and shouted, "Where were you when my son starved?" I didn't answer. I just picked up the bread, kissed it, and handed it back. That moment became a painting hung in every hall of governance. Not to glorify me, but to remind every ruler that power must bow to pain before it earns respect. Lisa led the reforms. She assembled a new council, not of lords, but of leaders. The healer who had survived the plague with no help from the crown. The scribe who taught orphans to read. The merchant woman who turned down 10 bribes to keep her trade fair. For the first time, Armathia's laws were written not behind closed doors, but in the streets, with hands inked in calluses and sweat. She outlawed arranged marriages among nobility. She opened the palace kitchens to feed the hungry twice a week. She built the first library that allowed peasants to touch books without asking permission. They called her Queen Lisa. But behind closed doors, she still made her own stew and punched me in the shoulder when I forgot to rest. She didn't let the title change her. And that saved me from letting mine change me again. Sometimes I'd find her walking alone in the old garden. The yellow roses had bloomed again, wild and defiant. She'd kneel beside them, touch the petals, and whisper something I could never quite hear. When I asked her once, she said, "I talked to your mother," just in case she's listening. That made me love her more than I thought possible. Because she knew what this all meant, more than crowns and thrones, more than law and victory. It meant not forgetting who we'd been before the fire. But peace does not come without enemies. And we knew one day someone would try to take it all again. A foreign kingdom, a forgotten cousin, a bitter noble hiding behind a title not yet burned. So we trained, not just soldiers, but leaders. We taught diplomacy as a weapon, compassion as a tactic. We made kindness harder to defeat than swords. And when the first challenge came 3 years later, it wasn't met with armies. It was met with truth. A letter sent to our border, written in the same style as the first rebellion flyers. It simply said, "We are no longer afraid. We have seen what a king can be." And at the bottom, signed in ink, "From the people of our enemy." Lisa read it aloud at the table and said, "Looks like you started something you can't stop." I smiled. Good. Maybe that's what real kings are meant to do. She leaned across the table. "And queens, 3 winters passed. They were not easy ones. The first froze our grain stores before harvest. The second brought plague to the southern provinces. And the third brought war. Not from our people, but from beyond our borders. King Merrick of Valithra, once an ally in name, declared us weak. A kingdom ruled by peasants, he said, by a tavern wench and a disgraced monarch in beggar's boots. He was wrong, but he wasn't foolish. He had watched as we stripped our nobles of land, broke apart merchant guilds that had bribed his own court for years, and ended every treaty written in shadows. We were dangerous, not because we threatened him with armies, but because we showed his people what was possible. Freedom is a virus, and we were contagious. He invaded at the start of spring. 10,000 soldiers crossed our border, claiming to come in peace, demanding protection for his trading roads. But everyone knew it was a siege in slow motion. He didn't want trade. He wanted our throne. More precisely, he wanted me. And her. They said Merrick had seen one of Lisa's speeches transcribed in their underground press. He laughed when she said a crown should be chosen like a farmer chooses his seed, by what grows from it, not what it looks like. But he stopped laughing when his own farmers began quoting her. So he marched. I didn't send knights. Not at first. I sent letters. 3 of them. 1 to his court, 1 to his people, and 1 to Merrick himself. I told him the truth, that he could take our land, maybe even my life, but he would never rule this kingdom. Because this crown was no longer made of gold. It was made of memory, of fire, of women who bled in silence, men who carried too much and were never thanked, children who had survived winters colder than any steel. This kingdom wasn't mine to lose anymore. It was theirs. Merrick didn't reply. He just advanced. So we prepared. Lisa took charge of the cities. She converted trade routes into supply lines. She turned granaries into safe houses. She gathered every herbalist, midwife, and brewer with knowledge of fire or healing and turned them into field generals. She didn't sit in a war room. She walked the villages, slept on wooden floors, listened to mothers cry. Then she returned to the capital with a map drawn not by nobles, but by the hands of the people who would die if we failed. I watched her lead, and I loved her more with every step. I led the army, not from the back, from the front. No plume on my helmet, no royal crest, just steel, leather, dust, and my voice calling my soldiers not by rank, but by name. They didn't call me Your Grace. They called me Aldrich. And when the first clash came, on the fields of Strathmore we held. Barely. The enemy outnumbered us. But they didn't outbleed us. They didn't outbelieve us. Because while they fought for coin, we fought for what we'd built. I stood over a soldier with arrows in his gut, only 16, and he whispered, "Tell her I followed her words." Every one. He meant Lisa. I buried him myself. The war dragged on. Months turned to cold mornings and colder nights. The kind where victory feels like a ghost, and you forget why you started fighting at all. But then one morning a raven came. Not from the front. From the palace. Lisa's message was short. Come home. It's time. I didn't understand. Until I arrived. Ellenford had changed again. While we bled on the fields, the people had risen, not just to resist Merrick, but to become the kingdom. Children taught reading classes to elders. Healers opened their homes to wounded from both sides. And in the center of the square, where I had once been chained, they had built a monument. Not of me. Of Lisa. No crown on her head. Just her hands raised, holding bread in one and parchment in the other. We follow those who feed us and teach us. The words were etched in stone, and I wept when I saw them. That night, Lisa met me on the old balcony, the one where I had once announced my return, the one where she had placed the crown in my hands. Now the wind carried no smoke, only the distant songs of children and blacksmiths, and a bell that rang for the end of the fast. "You brought me back for this?" I asked. She shook her head. "I brought you back because Merrick has sent a messenger." "What does he want?" "To surrender," she said. "On one condition." I raised an eyebrow. "What?" "That we never again send words to his people." A laugh bitter. He wants our silence. She nodded. And you said, she looked at me with that fire I'd fallen in love with. The fire that had never dimmed. I said we don't make deals with tyrants. We didn't accept surrender. We offered it. On our terms. Merrick withdrew. But not because we threatened him. Because his own soldiers laid down their weapons. They refused to fight a kingdom that had already won something he never could. The loyalty of its people. And the heart of its queen. After the war, everything changed. And yet nothing did. The streets were still filled with merchants shouting over apples and cloth. The tavern still rang with laughter and spilled ale. The baker still burned the edges of his loaves, and the children still chased dogs down the alley like kings of their own imagination. But there was something different in the eyes of the people. It wasn't fear anymore. It was ownership. This was their kingdom now. Not mine. Not Lisa's. Theirs. And we ruled knowing that every day. Lisa never liked the word rule. She said it felt like standing on someone's shoulders instead of beside them. So she rewrote the language of the palace. We no longer had subjects. We had neighbors. The throne room doors were never closed again. Twice a month, anyone could walk in and speak, not to a judge, not to a scribe, but to me, or to her. In person. We listened. We didn't always have answers, or money, or solutions, but we never turned anyone away. That mattered more than I ever imagined. One afternoon, an old woman from the hills near Howrin came in carrying a goat on a leash. She said the goat was sick, and she didn't trust anyone but the queen to look at it. We did, and Lisa held its face like it was a child. We sent her home with medicine and enough coin to feed 5 goats. She left crying, and I swear that evening the bells of Howrin rang louder than usual. But peace is a strange thing. It never feels like a gift. It feels like a lull before something breaks again. We knew that, so we never stopped working. While I focused on trade and justice, Lisa focused on what mattered most to her, education. She founded the House of Letters. Not a palace. Not a school. A place where anyone could come to learn. Anything. For free. It started with 2 rooms behind a bakery. By the end of the year, it was 3 buildings, 7 instructors, and over 100 students, from nobles to orphans. She taught the first class herself. I watched from the doorway. She didn't begin with a lecture. She began with a question. What do you know about power? A boy raised his hand. It means you get to tell others what to do. She smiled, then pointed to a girl in the back, no older than 8. Her hands were wrapped in cloth, burned scars from the forge. What do you think? The girl hesitated, then said, power is knowing when not to speak. Lisa nodded. That, she said, is the beginning of wisdom, and the room fell silent. I would sit with her at night on the old balcony and listen to her talk about dreams bigger than the kingdom. Imagine a world where kings are unnecessary, she'd say, where people choose how they live without asking permission. I'd smile. And what happens to kings like me in that world? She'd lean her head on my shoulder. They get to rest. Finally. But rest was never something she truly allowed herself. Not when there were mouths to feed, laws to rewrite, histories to correct. She worked harder than anyone I knew, and I feared quietly that it would cost her. Then one day it did. It started with a fever. Just a whisper of it. She brushed it off. Too much walking, she said. Too much rain. But by the 3rd day, she couldn't stand. I summoned every healer from every province. They tried roots, spells, salves, even prayers. Nothing worked. And one night, she looked at me with tired eyes and said, you must not stop. I held her hand, trembling. I won't. She smiled faintly. Even if they take me, they won't take us. No one is taking you, I whispered. But we both knew the truth. She passed the next morning. In the room where we first kissed. No crown on her head. Just a book in her lap and my name on her lips. They buried her not in the royal crypt, but in the garden. Beside the yellow roses she once spoke to in silence. And the day they lowered her into the earth, the sky rained for 12 hours straight. The whole kingdom stopped. Merchants didn't open stalls. Guards laid down their weapons. and every bell in every province rang until the sun returned. I returned to the throne room that night, alone. I looked at the stone chair and felt its weight like never before. Then I walked past it and sat on the steps instead, because I no longer needed to sit above anyone, and because the only person who ever made that chair feel light was gone. The people asked me if I would remarry. I said I already had everything I ever needed. Her memory, her voice in every library, her fire in every streetlight, her soul in every child who dared to raise their hand and ask why. Lisa wasn't gone. She had simply become the kingdom. After her death, the palace felt too large. I had once walked these halls believing they were mine, crafted for my reign, echoing my name. But now, every marble pillar, every carved window, every step on the winding stairways whispered only hers. She had never tried to belong here. She had made the palace belong to her, and in doing so, she gave it back to the people. The council room remained untouched. Her chair, made of simple oak without gold or velvet, stood beside mine. No one dared move it, not even me. Every decision I made, I still glanced toward that chair, waiting for her raised eyebrow, her sigh, her silent dare to do better. I never heard her voice, but I always heard her question. What grows from this? And if I couldn't answer it, I didn't pass the law. The kingdom of Armathia did not collapse without its queen. It thrived, because she had never wanted the people to depend on her, only on each other. The House of Letters expanded into 9 provinces. The council grew more diverse each year, chosen not by bloodlines, but by ballots. And for the first time in recorded history, a midwife led the royal court of health, because Lisa had made the world believe in the hands of women who were never allowed to touch power. I withdrew from ceremony, not from duty, but from spectacle. No more parades, no more balls. I attended births in the poorest districts and funerals in the smallest villages. I asked for tea in kitchens where mice still skittered beneath the floorboards. I sat with shoemakers, blacksmiths, and grain porters and asked them what I could do that she had not yet done. They didn't speak of tax or law. They asked for benches where their children could read, for lanterns along the roads where daughters walked home alone, for songs about queens who had died standing up. I gave them all 3. Her birthday became a day of silence, not mourning, reflection. Across the kingdom, people wrote letters, not to loved ones, but to themselves. Promises, confessions, hopes. They burned them in public fires, not to destroy them, but to commit them to the world. Somewhere in the north, a child once wrote on a piece of bark, "When I grow up, I want to be someone like her." Not afraid to speak, I kept that piece of bark. It sits on my writing desk to this day. I grew old, slowly at first, then all at once. My hair grayed in streaks. My knees forgot how to kneel. My vision blurred just enough that I needed help reading my own speeches. But I still rode through the streets every week. I still attended the open courts. And I still visited the yellow rose garden at sunrise. I never spoke to the flowers, not like she did, but I listened. And sometimes, I think they whispered back. When I turned 70, the people held a gathering. Not a coronation, not a festival, but a gathering. They called it the Day of Roots. Because, they said, under my reign, their lives had stopped being leaves blown by storms. They had grown roots, purpose, belonging. They gave me no gifts that day, only stories. One woman stood before me and said, "Because of you, my daughter is a physician, and because of her, I survived the winter." A boy, no older than 10, stood on tiptoe and shouted, "Because of you, I believe I can be king someday." I knelt beside him, knees aching, and said, "No, child, because of you, I believed I could be again." But peace, true peace, is not only about rule. It is about legacy. And I knew mine was fading, not because I was forgotten, but because I had been replaced by a kingdom that no longer needed me to guide it. That in itself was her greatest triumph and my greatest comfort. When the signs of the end came, tiredness I couldn't shake, pain I couldn't place, I didn't fight them. I simply asked for one thing, to be buried not in stone, but beneath the same soil as her, by the yellow roses. No statue, no plaque, just our names carved into one piece of wood, weathered by rain and time. And on my final night, I wrote one last letter. Not to the kingdom, to her. My queen, I see you in every book they read, in every hand they raise, in every fire that warms the forgotten. You were never meant to rule, but you ruled better than any born to it. I was born with a crown I never deserved. You died with one they gave you willingly, and I go to you now, not as a king, but as a man who loved you with everything he had left. Wait for me. The roses are blooming. I placed the letter beside her chair, the one in the council chamber, and then I laid down and dreamed of yellow petals. They say I passed quietly. No groans, no gasps, no struggle, just a sigh, as if I had finished reading the last page of a very long book. They found me with a pen still in my fingers and a folded letter on the floor beside my hand. Some say my crown lay at my feet. Others swear I had placed it on the window ledge so the morning sun could touch it one last time. The truth is simpler. I had already laid my crown down years ago, on the day I placed it in her hands, and she never let it fall. The kingdom did not collapse. It did not weep for weeks. It moved, as it always had, with slow and sacred steadiness. But something did shift. When news of my passing reached the towns, people stopped whatever they were doing and faced the direction of Ellenford, even if they weren't sure which way it was. They just paused and breathed, like they were remembering someone they hadn't met, but had always known. Children wrote poems on scraps of paper and tied them to trees. A mason carved our names, Aldrich and Lisa, into stone, not on a mountain, but on a school wall in the western hills. And at the House of Letters, where she had once asked, "What do you know about power?" they added a new question beneath it. "What do you know about love?" It was the letters that surprised them most. Hundreds of them, tucked in books, behind tapestries, inside drawers and walls. Letters I had written in my later years. To strangers, to enemies, to children I'd met once and never saw again. And one to the boy who died on the field of Strathmore, who had followed her words with his last breath. Each letter ended the same way. Rule kindly. Those letters became their own book. It was bound in brown leather, left unnamed, and passed hand to hand like a sacred promise. And over time, it traveled beyond the borders of Armathia, to kingdoms that had once mocked us, to cities that had never heard our names, to orphans, rebels, poets, rulers. And in the margins, people wrote their answers to my words. They didn't ask permission. They knew they didn't need it. The throne remained empty for a time, not from fear, from reverence, until the council, in unanimous decision, offered the crown to someone unexpected, a child from the outer province, a girl born in the dust of the salt fields, raised on stories of the tavern queen and the king in beggar's clothes. She was 17. She spoke softly, but when she read from the book of letters during her acceptance, every head bowed, not to her bloodline, but to the fire in her voice. And when she placed the crown on her own head, she whispered, "For them." The first thing she did as queen was declare the old palace a place of learning, no longer a seat of rule, but a house of memory. She moved the capital to the center of the kingdom, not geographically, but spiritually, to the city where the rebellion began, to the village where Lisa had once served barley stew to a strange beggar in the shadows. And there, in that city, they built a new hall, not of marble, but of wood, warm, modest, strong. They called it the hearth. The hearth was not guarded, its doors never locked. Inside were the two chairs we had once ruled from, hers still simple, mine worn soft from years of leaning too far forward. Above them hung no flag, just a single carving. Love, listen, lead. Each year, on the day the yellow roses bloom, people gather in the garden where we were buried. Not with candles, with seeds. They plant something, anything, a promise to keep life growing. An old woman once planted a book, pressed it into the soil beside our names and whispered, "It's what she would have wanted." No one questioned it. The next spring, flowers bloomed from the book's spine. They didn't have a name, so the children called them Queen's Fire. Some say we live in the flowers. Others say we live in the laws that protect the weak. But those who truly knew us, those who read every word, remembered every wound, wept not because we were gone. They wept because we had taught them something dangerous, something irreversible. That power is not a throne. It is a choice. And we had chosen them. Again and again and again. The wind still moves through the garden each morning. Soft, steady. Some say if you sit long enough, you'll hear her voice in the breeze. Others claim I walk beside her, our hands still clasped, whispering old arguments about how best to fix the roof above the baker's shop. None of it's proven. But sometimes, just before dawn, a rose will bloom hours earlier than the others. And people smile, because they know. We're not watching. We're still here, rooted. Years became decades. The kingdom no longer kept time by wars or rains, but by gardens, by harvests, by new teachers sworn in under the portrait of a queen who had never been crowned in the traditional way. No one called it a golden age. They called it the gentle era. Because gentleness, after centuries of swords and silence, was the most revolutionary thing they could remember. And in that gentleness, they remembered us, not with statues or prayers, but with questions. Every schoolchild knew our story. But more importantly, they knew what it meant. Why did King Aldrich leave the palace? Why did Queen Lisa feed a man who had nothing? Why didn't they hang the brother who betrayed them? Why didn't they build walls around the city after the war? They asked because they knew the answers mattered. Not for history. For them. One little girl in the Southern District wrote a poem that spread faster than royal decrees ever had. It was found chalked onto gates, carved into benches, whispered across dinner tables. It went. He ruled with ears. She ruled with hands. Together they ruled like soil and rain. Not the storm, but what it leaves behind. I remember reading it from the other side, and I wept. The throne was never sat upon again. Not fully. Successive rulers sat in simpler chairs, at ground level with their people. They made decisions from the same height as their farmers, their healers, their children. But the old throne was kept, polished, preserved, not in the hall of power, but in the chamber of becoming, inside the hearth. It sat beneath a skylight, where morning sun spilled gold across its cold surface. Visitors were encouraged to sit in it, not for glory, for reflection. Each who did had to answer one question before they rose. What will you carry from here? They answered aloud. Their words were recorded in the Book of Quiet Oaths. It is now 11 volumes long, and growing. One spring, a carpenter visited the garden where we were buried. He didn't leave a flower. He left a chisel, and at the foot of our wooden marker, he carved. They gave us everything, so we gave everything back. No one knows his name. They simply call him the last builder. Because after that, the kingdom stopped building monuments. They started building bridges instead. Travelers came from every continent, not to conquer, to learn, to walk the streets where Lisa once carried buckets twice her size, to kneel in the garden, to whisper stories into the air and hope that something ancient might whisper back. In time, Armathia became known not as the kingdom of trade, nor military might, nor scholarly wisdom, but as the kingdom of memory, because we had learned to remember what mattered, and to let go of what never had. Even our enemies softened. King Marek's great-granddaughter once sent a letter. She was 15. It read, "My tutor told me Lisa was once a tavern girl, but I think she was always a queen. Your people were lucky. I hope I can be like her." The letter was added to the House of Letters archive, and every time a child read it aloud, they were asked, what made her a queen? And they would answer with small but certain voices. She didn't wait to be crowned. In the far north, a village built entirely from glass named its first school the Beggar's Path. Not because I had walked it once, but because they wanted their children to remember that a king had once chosen to be small, to understand, to bleed with them, to ask questions instead of give orders. And because in that smallness, something sacred had begun. One of the last documents I ever wrote, which was found only decades later in the base of my writing desk, contained just one sentence. If I had never worn the crown, I still would have chosen her. It is now inscribed on a silver plate beneath our resting place. Visitors leave their own vows carved on stones and scraps of bark. They leave rings beside the roses. Sometimes they leave nothing but silence, and that silence says everything. There is no temple to our memory, no religion bearing our names. And yet, in every act of kindness, in every law that begins with the words, "For the smallest among us," in every teacher who kneels to listen instead of command, we are there, not as rulers, but as reminders that the greatest power is not held. It is shared, and the greatest legacy is not monuments. It is people who live differently because you once lived it all. It's strange writing this now, knowing it may never be read in my lifetime or even the next, but some part of me hopes it finds a reader. Not because I crave remembrance, but because I want you to know that all of this, it was real. She was real. Lisa. She wasn't born with jewels in her hair or lords kneeling at her feet. She scrubbed floors, fed drunkards, watched her mother die in a bed with no sheets. She knew what hunger felt like, not just in the stomach, but in the soul. And yet she gave, over and over. Not because she had much, but because she believed people deserved more than what they'd been given. She believed in me before I believed in myself. And when I handed her a crown, she handed it back, saying, "Let's build something no one can steal." So we did. Sometimes when I couldn't sleep, I would write down memories. Not just the victories, but the failures. The days I wanted to run again. The mornings I doubted myself. The arguments we had about what justice meant, what peace required, what cost was too high. She always won, but she never gloated. She'd just hold my hand after and say, "We're both right." I just shouted first, and I would laugh even through the tears. Because how do you love someone who remakes the entire world around you and still insists they're just doing their part? You love them with your whole life. And I did. There are things I never told her. Not out of shame, but out of fear I didn't have the words. Like the first time I saw her sleep beside a fire, curled into herself like a forgotten poem, I knew I'd never want anything more than to keep her safe. Or the morning after the first snow when she woke up and said, "I had a dream you were lost in a library." And I replied, "That sounds like heaven." And she kissed my forehead and whispered, "Then I'll be your map." She always was, even now. The world is quieter now. Not because there's no noise, but because there's more listening. Our people have learned to pause before they punish, to ask before they judge, to imagine lives beyond their own skin. Lisa did that, not by preaching, but by walking through the mud with them, by speaking plainly, bleeding publicly, and never once asking to be called queen. They gave her that title only after she died, and even then, they whispered it with reverence, as if saying it too loudly might disturb the peace she worked so hard to plant. There's a story the children tell now, about a beggar and a woman with fire in her eyes. They say he knocked on her door, asking for bread. She gave him stew instead and made him promise to return the bowl. He did, but with it he returned his name. And she, in return, gave him something heavier than gold, a reason to carry it well. They tell it with different endings. In one, they vanish together into the forest. In another, they rise into the stars, watching over every act of kindness. But my favorite, the one where the kingdom forgets their names, but never forgets their lessons. Because that's how you know a story was worth telling. When it leaves behind something stronger than memory. It leaves behind change. If you're reading this, whoever you are, I'll leave you with no instructions. Only this: walk among your people, without guards, without banners, without fear. Let them see you sweat, fail, cry. Let them teach you. And when they do, listen like your life depends on it. Because it does. All crowns fall eventually. But the hands you hold while wearing it, those are the ones that write the future. I have only one regret, that I didn't find her sooner. That I wasted so many years thinking the throne made me a king, when it was love that did. But if I had to lose those years to learn that lesson, I would, every time, because it brought me to her. To Lisa, the woman who ruled beside me without ever needing a crown. Now I feel the end drawing close, not with dread, with readiness, like turning the final page of a book you never wanted to finish, but knowing the story has been told well, and you, whoever you are the next chapter. So write it, not with ink, with kindness, with courage, with sweat and failure, and something that costs more than gold but is worth more than empires. Write it in the way you speak to the voiceless, in the way you feed the forgotten, in the way you bend, not to power, but to justice. And maybe, just maybe, someone will sit where you once stood and say, they ruled with ears, and hands, and fire, just like we did. The years moved on without us. The kingdom flourished, not because of our absence, but because of what we'd left behind. Not laws carved into stone, not portraits in golden frames, but something softer, invisible even, a way of doing things, a way of being. Every ruler who came after us was told the same thing on their first day. Sit low, speak last, listen more. And those who couldn't didn't last long, because the people had learned the taste of dignity. And once you've tasted it, no crown can take it away. I was told they never replaced the wooden marker at our grave. It weathered, split, softened by time and rain, but it was never touched. Not out of neglect, out of devotion. It had become sacred in its imperfection, just like we were. Each spring they still gathered, not to mourn, to remember forward. That's what they called it. A tradition not built on who we were, but on what they still hoped to become. They would bring seeds, letters, worn shoes, pieces of broken tools, things that had meaning, things that carried struggle and hope, and lay them at the foot of the marker. The offerings weren't for us. They were for each other. A small boy once brought a broken quill. When asked why, he said, because I want to write like she did, with truth so sharp it cuts without hurting. His story traveled across the provinces, and within a year, 1,000 quills, some whole, some shattered, appeared in the garden. They were gathered and woven into a tapestry. It now hangs in the House of Letters. They named it. Her voice 1,000 times. I sometimes wonder what she would say if she could see it all. The little girl leading a courtroom at 10. The baker's daughter teaching algebra in the city square. The old man who once spat at the palace now polishing the brass bell that hangs above the new nursery door. She would smile. Then she'd roll up her sleeves and get back to work. That was always her way. She didn't believe in a rival, only in the next good thing that could still be done. And because of that, they kept doing them. Long after we were gone. In the East, a community built entirely by widows and war orphans raised their own library. They named it not after royalty, but after the tavern where she first gave me bread. It was called the Bowl and Flame. Above the door, carved by hand. All are fed here, by food or by fire. I have no illusions that we were perfect. We made mistakes. I was slow to act when the Southern famine first broke. She once let anger blind her in a decision that cost a village its well. We argued. We failed. But we learned. Publicly. We apologized. Publicly. We showed that leadership wasn't about being right. It was about being willing to be wrong and change. And that, more than any decree or reform, changed the kingdom. Because people no longer feared being seen. They feared staying the same. One of the last letters I wrote was to a little girl named Mira. She had sent me a drawing, crayon on torn parchment, of Lisa and me standing in front of a tree with hearts for leaves. She wrote, in shaky script, "When I grow up, I want to make people feel safe like you do." I wrote back, "Mira, you already have." That letter, I'm told, is now copied and gifted to every child on their 12th birthday. Not for the signature, but for the message. That being good, truly, intentionally good, is a kind of leadership too. Now I imagine them, the next children, running barefoot through the alleyways we once feared, climbing walls we were once kept behind, speaking truths we were once punished for whispering. And I know deep in whatever place still remembers that they are free, not because of the revolution, not because of the war, but because of a woman who chose to give without knowing who would receive. who loved without guarantee, who ruled without needing to be bowed to. Lisa. Sometimes I wonder if there will come a day when no one remembers our names. No Aldrich, no Lisa, just stories. Vague, soft-edged tales of a king and a woman who walked the kingdom hand in hand. And I smile, because that's how you know the story lasted. When the names fade, but the warmth remains. So to you, dear reader, whoever you may be, if you're still holding this final volume, if you've traced your fingers over the pages where we lived and wept and hoped, do not close the book with sorrow. Close it like a letter sent to someone you love, a message carried on the wind, a whisper that says, build gently, burn bravely, love loudly, because that's what we did. And it was enough, more than enough. If this story has a true ending, then it must belong not to me, nor even to her, but to all who came after. Because kingdoms are not meant to last. Legacies are. And ours was never written in stone. It was written in how people chose to carry themselves after we were gone. In the quiet courage of everyday decisions. In the way a teacher raised her voice for a child no one else defended. In the way a farmer refused to take more than he needed. In the way a girl knelt before a wildflower and said, "You remind me of her." That was our true inheritance. Not lands, not gold, but example. And it proved stronger than steel. They say that now, every child in Armathia learns to read from the Book of Quiet Oaths, not because it is sacred, but because it was honest. They study not just our victories, but our missteps. The arguments Lisa and I had behind closed doors. The decrees we repealed. The nights I broke under the weight of my own doubt. The days she stood alone while I wrestled with fear. They do not teach us as heroes. They teach us as humans. And because of that, the children grow up believing that they can do what we did, or better. And that, I believe, is the most revolutionary thing of all. Once a year, a lantern is lit in every village. Just one, placed in the highest window, left to burn through the night in complete silence. No songs, no speeches, no ceremony, only the flicker of flame and memory. They call it the night of fire. Not in mourning, in gratitude. For the spark that was lit between a beggar and a tavern girl. For the kingdom that bloomed from it. For the truth that changed everything. That real power is not what you hold. It is what you pass on. A historian once wrote that Aldrich Thorne died a quiet king. They were wrong. I died loud. Not with words or war or banners, but with love so loud it echoed in every policy, in every law, in every field planted without fear. I died knowing that I had not built an empire. I had built a people. And that people, they were still building, still burning, still believing. There are moments I imagine the day Lisa and I will be forgotten completely. When no portraits remain. When our names are nothing more than dust in some scholar's footnote. But I do not fear that, because forgetting names is not forgetting impact. And impact lives in how people treat each other when no one is watching. She used to say, the loudest thing we ever built was silence, because in that silence, we taught them to listen, and they did. One last image I leave you with. A girl, no older than 12, standing in a field of windbent grass, a book tucked under one arm, dirt on her knees, a question in her eyes. She isn't royal. She isn't rich. But in her, I see everything. She walks to the edge of the hill and calls her little brother to join her. He runs, barefoot, grinning. They sit beneath the shade of a tree someone planted long ago. They read aloud, to each other. And between them, the future is written. Without a crown, without permission, just two children passing fire hand to hand. So yes, I was king. She was never called queen until after she died. But together, we ruled something far greater than land. We ruled a change, a turning, a beginning. And if I could return, even for a breath, even for a heartbeat, I would not ask to sit on the throne. I would ask only to hold her hand one last time, to thank her for saving me from power and teaching me to choose love instead. Let this be the final entry in our story, not the end. The invitation to live as we did, to lead as we did, to fall, rise, listen, bleed, heal, and love as loudly as you dare. And when you do, know that you are not alone. You walk in our footsteps, and more importantly, we walk in yours.